Hi guys, my name's Patrick. I am an illustrator and a history enthusiast, and today I'm going to be photoshopping this concept art from Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This isn't a criticism of Assassin's Creed Valhalla or the concept artists involved. I think this is a really cool design. I don't think my historical accurate version is going to look quite as interesting, but I'm going to try and make it look as cool as possible. I do actually have a sponsor today. I'm sponsored by Theatre of War, who make these amazing historical designs based on Norse, medieval, Anglo-Saxon designs. So go over to Theatre of War, check out their amazing, historically accurate merchandise. Get yourself a t-shirt because they are so cool. So let's get into the editing. So what is historically inaccurate about this picture? Let's start with the helmet. So it looks like they've mostly based the helmet off a helmet called Valsierder 5. Now the Valsierder helmets are really, really cool. You should go and check those out. But they really date from before the Viking era, before the Alfredian period that the game is set in. They come from mostly the 6th and 7th centuries. So it's a little bit too early for the period that we are talking about. They would be beyond antique in the period that the game is set, which is the late 9th century. So what helmet is correct? Well, we do have an amazing find of a helmet from York, which is dated to the end of the 8th century, the beginning of the 9th century. So it would still be an old helmet, just not as old as the Valsierder helmets. And you can see it looks quite different from the Valsierder helmets. So that's the helmet we're going to use. Unfortunately, I cannot give it a crest. Now, there is some evidence for crests in the early Anglo-Saxon period. So the helmet that was reconstructed from pieces of helmet from the Staffordshire Hoard, the researchers that reconstructed that chose to include a piece that looks like a Roman helmet crest holder, which has, so it could have had a crest, that helmet. There's also the Bentley Grange helmet, which has this amazing boar's crest. Unfortunately, those helmets are again too early for the period that we're looking at, so we can't use those. So we're going to use the Coppergate helmet, Fantastic Survival. It has this amazing male Aventail. Probably the best preserved helmet of the Dark Ages, full stop. And it looks amazing. So we're going to use that for our Anglo-Saxon warrior. What's next? So the armour they've got him wearing it is scale mail. There's no real evidence for this in the Anglo-Saxon period at all. The only evidence we have for Anglo-Saxon armour, for body armour at least, is chainmail. Which is basically made of interlocking metal links. We don't also have evidence for padded textile armour. So this gambeson, as it's called, which is layered up fabric, has to go. Those don't really come in until the 1100s or 1200s as far as we know. We don't have any evidence before the kind of Crusader era for those. So we got to get rid of that. It looks like on one leg he's wearing something called splintered armour, which is made of like strips of iron on a backing of probably leather. This is again straight out of Valsierder, so they were probably looking at the Valsierder burials, which are Scandinavian, so I'm not sure why they were looking at those, but they are not. There's no finds of splintered armour from England, and in this period at least. Splintered armour kind of comes back in the late medieval period, but that has to go, unfortunately. The last and biggest farb of all is the sword. He's got a massive kind of fantasy greatsword. Now, it's a bit different to actual historical finds of greatswords, but greatswords are really coming in the Renaissance. So, while they did have two-handed swords sort of in the 1200s, which is still 300 years or so after the period we're talking about, greatswords are really a gunpowder era weapon. They come in the Renaissance with pike and shot kind of warfare. If you're going to have great swords, you may as well have cannons bombarding the longships with artillery. We can't have that, so that's got to go. So I'm going to get started on editing, and I'm going to check back in with you in a minute. I've kind of taken some dodgy photos of me in some chainmail to use as the armour, kind of standing in roughly the same position as this guy. I've also got a picture. Managed to find a picture of roughly the right angle of the Coppergate helmet. And I've already cut those out, so I'm just going to literally copy and paste them on top of our warrior. Okay, so I'm just going to cut that a bit more, make that fit. You notice I've given him an axe. Now I might turn that into a spear, which is another weapon which they probably were using two-handed. There are no two-handed swords in the Anglo-Saxon era. The most common weapon would have been sword, a single-handed sword and shield, or even more common, spear and shield. Now they may have been using, as I say, axes two-handed, potentially, we don't know. Probably were using some spears two-handed. There were some really big spearheads that are both almost like swords on the end of spears, which sometimes called hewing spears, which were coming in type C, type D kind of spearheads. I'm going to go over this, I'm going to edit it a bit more, and I'm going to come back to you when it's looking good. Okay, so my brother has advised that I use the Hereford spear, which is a beautiful find, which has these kind of copper rings on the inside and is dated to exactly the right period. I've used that. I've changed it to a spear from an axe. I've kind of had a look at the Anglo-Saxon axe finds from this period, and it seems that they're all very small and they're not really that common compared with spears and sword finds even. So I've decided not to bother with the axe. I don't think they were really becoming common in the Anglo-Saxons until sort of the 11th century, even quite a long time after the sort of 1066 period. I think a spear would be much more typical of an Anglo-Saxon warrior, so that's what I've gone with. Right, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go now onto the British Museum website, and I'm going to go and look through their archives and look for two things. One, I'm going to look for a sword hilt, because I've kind of just sketched in roughly a sword and I want to base it on a specific find. And I'm going to look for a 9th century brooch. So first of all, let's just have a look at the brooches. They've got loads as far as I remember, and some really, really beautiful ones. This one, I think I've used this one before. It's very pretty. I think I'm going to go with this one. And for a sword. Okay, so there's this pommel that I really like. I think I'm going to use that pommel. I'm going to have to find a hilt from somewhere else and just pop it on. Okay, so one thing I've noticed is I have just put the sword set up for a left-hander. This isn't actually a historical inaccuracy. I just tend to do it a lot. I think because I'm left-handed. There is actually evidence for people using things in the left hand. I think there's pictures of warriors that are left-handed on the Bayeux Tapestry. And there's actually evidence that this guy from Sutton Hoo was left-handed because of the wear on the sword. You can see that he was wearing it set up for left-handed use. So there doesn't seem to be the evidence that you see in later periods of bias against left-handers. So, but anyway, I'm putting it on the right side just because I don't want to fill my page with left-handers for some reason. A bit weird. Okay, so I've changed the spearhead to a much kind of meatier, bigger type D, type C kind of spearhead, just because I think it suits the character a bit better, this much bigger spearhead. I've also changed the mail to have this copper decoration around the bottom. There is some copper decoration attaching the mail aventail to the back of the Coppergate helmet. Some copper rings. And actually, also again, Sutton Hoo much earlier, but there was some copper decoration on the chainmail. Not a trim, not copper trim around the edge, but the rivets that close the mail shut in alternating rows, they are copper. I'd love to see a reconstruction because I imagine that would look amazing, this kind of glint of goldy copper coming through. Someone make a reconstruction. And I'm also going to give him a shield slung over his back. We know from art that they did this in the early Middle Ages. They had straps on the back of the shields and they could just throw it over their shoulder. You can imagine it would give good protection to your back as well. They just slung it over the back ready to use it if they needed it. We know from art that they did this. There's also surviving evidence for straps and things. I want to make the scabbard look a bit better. I think that's probably going to finish it off. So I'm going to literally copy and paste this scabbard from a 10th century, so a bit after the period we're talking about, from a 10th century manuscript, copy and paste it on. Okay, so that is about it. Just wrapping it up now. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Let me know if there's any other films you want to correct. Don't forget to check out Theatre of War. Check out all of their designs. I am going to leave it there. Thanks very much.